Disclaimer. Judge Ron Rangel is providing this podcast and website for educational purposes only, as well as to give the public general information regarding topics related to the criminal justice system. The views, thoughts, and opinions of his guest speakers are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Judge Rangel. All rise. You are now listening to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel, educating the public and expanding mindsets. Subscribe on our website, beyondthegavelpodcast.com, or your favorite podcast platform for more of the latest podcast episodes and updates.
Welcome to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. I am your host. Now, this is part 2 of the fascinating interview we had with Anthony Rodriguez, an investigator with the district attorney's office. Today, we're going to talk about a very important case, the BBQ Murder case, right? That's a case that was featured on Netflix. It was very gruesome, happened here in San Antonio, the middle of the city. Shook the nation, essentially, because of the facts behind it. But it was a case that was on TV. Netflix called me before they wanted to record, and they asked me for permission to record in the courtroom. So they did record, the bench and my computer, and just one day, just kind of randomly went in there. I told them I really shouldn't talk to them at that time because I'm a judge, and I never want to impact or influence how other people see cases. But this is a Netflix case. Now, in full disclosure, I have not looked at the episodes. It's been out for a while, and I've referenced it. I still haven't had a chance to look at it. I've been pretty busy. But it is in a TV show or series that is called what?
I Am a Killer. It is now, I believe, on the 6th season. And these are the first 2 episodes of that season. So episodes 1 and 2.
You were the investigator on that case, right?
I was the DA investigator on it. So just to kind of give it full clarity.
Yes.
SAPD had its own detective on it that worked it up. And like you pointed out earlier, now it comes over to our office and a DA investigator now gets kind of a second pair of eyes. And one of the best ways I describe what a DA investigator does is we reconstruct the investigation. And through reconstruction, we're finding the witnesses and we're re-interviewing the witnesses. Because like you pointed out earlier, when you wanted to go out in the field and see the crime scene, we also need to see the investigation. We need to see, like, what did the witness say and what did the witness mean? Because sometimes those are 2 very different things.
Right.
And so you may read something, Candy's actually a great example of this. When I first read the police report, I thought, man, this poor girl, like, she's in the middle of this thing. Like, she's kind of stuck. And I remember talking to some of the prosecutors about it early on. And the idea of maybe she was like kind of compelled to be involved or maybe be in some sort of level of duress was kind of floated out there. I will say that, as we pointed out earlier, these cases are very fluid. When they come in, it goes to like one prosecutor, then it jumps to like another prosecutor. And same thing happens with the DA investigators. It doesn't go to like me and it just stays with me until trial. And it may go through the hands of a couple of DA investigators. And with this case, we call it the BBQ case. I did not initially get it. In fact, I got on this case really closer to the end. And my involvement on it was twofold. Again, the gang stuff, which was kind of minor because I quickly, shut down the idea that this was a gang hit. But then the second part of it was the primary witness, Sylvia Flores. The courtroom investigator, every court has like its own DA investigator.
That's here in Bexar County.
Here in Bexar County. So like, for example, you're in the 379th, there's a DA investigator assigned to your court.
Yes.
One for, regular felony and one for family violence.
And I see them, and people have a perception that somehow or another those investigators work with the judges.
Oh, no, yeah.
We never converse.
Right.
We never have any communications because they're part of the DA team.
Right.
And that would be inappropriate. So I see them coming in and out. I always appreciate them, but I never actually have had an opportunity to address them other than a hello.
You know what? I remember when I first came over here, the idea of talking to a judge was like, I'm not going up there. like that's a judge. Like that's out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I have since learned that the judges are very nice people. I'm friends with many of them. I'm pleased to call you a friend.
Yes.
And but I when I got on this case, they just needed extra time looking for Sylvia. And like as we put it earlier, the courtroom investigators pulled in a million different directions. They're working on files. They have a million cases going on. And at that time, I kind of had this secondary duty of major crimes. And so they asked me, hey, can you dig a little deeper and see if you could find Sylvia? And so it took me several months to find her. Sylvia is a very interesting story in herself. Sadly, the Netflix doesn't really give justice to the story of Sylvia. Just a quick recap on her. I know you haven't seen the show, but the general facts of the case is you have the two defendants. You have Daniel Lopez and Gabriel Moreno, and you have the victim.
Now, the offense happened 2014.
Yes, sir.
The trial was in 2018, because I think that's an important prelude to talk about Sylvia.
Right.
Right. So you got the two defendants.
Yes, sir. And so you have the two defendants. And what's important what you're bringing up there with that 4-year gap between the murder and the trial is Sylvia is essential in that 4-year gap.
Yes.
And
that I do remember.
Right.
Yes.
And the reason why she's so essential is there's actually, the show only talks about a handful of people, but there's actually a lot of people in this house when this murder takes place.
Right.
And all of them have some sort of involvement in the murder, except for one person, and that's Sylvia Flores. So that makes her a crucial witness because she doesn't have a dog, she doesn't have anything to gain in testifying. She's also a victim in this case.
Yes. Well, let's talk about the case a little bit. Let's
Sure.
just kind of give a prelude, and then we'll get to Sylvia. So this is the trial. It was a murder case, super high profile. It lasted 5 days. And I tell folks all the time, this is Texas, right? So in Texas, we can try cases pretty rapidly. I mean, and it takes us a day just to get the panel selected for the jury, bring them in, right, have the voir dire, which is the jury selection process. The actual evidence lasted 5 days. Now, this is a case where let's explain this a little bit, right? Let's give a little background for those that have not seen the story. So this is, you got the two defendants that you talked about. They somehow or another lured over the victim and the victim's girlfriend. So the victim's name was Pee Wee.
Yes. Louis Menchaca, they call him Pee Wee. These are gang members. They all have little gang names,
Yes.
And, but the luring, actually the case starts the day before.
Yes.
And so Daniel Lopez and Louis Menchaca get into a fight. And this is essentially a drug deal gone bad. It's kind of the easiest way to explain the fight. Menchaca is there to buy drugs. Fight breaks out, and Menchaca ends up stabbing Daniel with a knife. And so essentially Daniel loses the fight. He doesn't lose his life. The knife wound is not life-threatening. He does go to the hospital for stitches, but it's not life-threatening.
And I do remember that. Right.
And Menchaca, just to kind of give a little bit more context, is related to a girl named Candy Dominguez.
Right.
And Candy is Daniel Lopez's, the guy that was stabbed. They're dating. They're in a relationship.
They had been dating about a month.
Right. It's a fairly new relationship. And
this is something I could talk about so the listeners know.
Great.
Because generally speaking, I say judges can't talk about pending cases, but this is an old case.
Yes.
The trial was almost a decade ago. The appeals process has all been gone. If anything comes up later, it's going to be through the writ. So I can talk about the case, but in full disclosure, just to be fair to the process, I'm not going to give opinions. I'm not going to give my inner thoughts or anything like that. We're just talking about stuff that's on the record, on my end.
Right.
You can talk about whatever you
yeah. Well, Candy and Menchaca are cousins.
Yes.
And they're not like distant cousins. Like they know each other. They were
First
raised
cousins.
Together, first cousins.
Yes.
They talk to themselves, amongst themselves very frequently. And so that's one of the reasons why Menchaca was there to get drugs from Daniel through Candy. And so fight breaks out. Menchaca stabs Daniel. And privately, Daniel tells Candy, I'm going to take his life. And I want you to bring him over to your house, Candy's house, because I'm going to kill him there. And this is the next day. And Candy says, okay. And so
she's cousin.
So it'd be easy for her to ask him to come over.
Right.
And so Sylvia is in a bad place. She's a prostitute. She's a drug addict.
She was a heroin addict.
Serious heroin addict. And one of the ways that she earned money was she shoplifted makeup, and she would sell it really on the corner of, in a big tote. And she would also sell it on Craigslist. And so Candy calls Sylvia up, or Menchaca up actually, and says, "Hey, tell Sylvia I have somebody here who's going to buy everything, the whole box. Just bring it over. I got a buyer. You're going to make your whole sale at one time." And of course, this is something that they jumped at. And so they go to her house. They don't have a reason really to be afraid. And she tells them, "Go in the back bedroom, set it up. The buyer will be here in a moment."
Yes.
And so Menchaca and her go into this bedroom, and waiting there is Daniel Lopez and Gabriel Moreno. One has a bat and the other has a lead pipe. And they just immediately start hitting Menchaca with their instruments. Sylvia is taken into the bedroom. I'm sorry, the bathroom, and she's stripped naked and she's held captive in this bathtub area, and she can hear everything.
She was chained, right? She was
She
chained
was
to the
chained
toilet.
up, right? And so she can hear the thumps from the bat and the pipe. She can hear the screams from Menchaca. She can hear Menchaca asking his cousin Candy to make them stop. She hears everything.
And the interesting part of this, from what I recall, is that Candy, who was the person who, I don't know if she owned the home, but she certainly was the individual that the home belonged to.
Right.
Her children were in another room, young children that came in to testify during the trial about hearing all these things.
Right. And what I remember watching their interviews, the children, and they seemed unfazed by what they heard. They described it as maybe somebody moving furniture. I mean, they're hearing screams.
Yes.
I don't know. I've never heard screams when I'm moving furniture, but her, her dad was there too. Her dad,
That's right.
she told her dad, take all the kids in the back bedroom. And so it's actually her dad that is how law enforcement even got involved. And so the dad takes the kids into the back bedroom and he hears everything. And so he calls his ex-wife and he tells her what he knows happened. He knows somebody was murdered. And it's the ex-wife who now calls the police, and everything goes from there. And but Sylvia, is forced to hear everything. And, when she's interviewed by police, she is terrified. She does not want to cooperate. She's terrified of these people. She saw what they did. And she explains that she's in this bathroom waiting to die. Every time the door opens, she's like, okay, this is it. And nothing happens.
So she's going through this heavy trauma.
And kind of going back to Sylvia, she's already had a really rough life. So, when the way I found Sylvia was through her mom. I remember my old mentor, Mark Gibson, told me, you got to find somebody and you can't find mama. She'll find them.
That's good advice.
So I found mom and mom found Sylvia, and that's how we got her. We were able to talk to her. But mom explained to me that Sylvia was early in life, she was like a nursing student. She was going places. And then one day she's driving home drunk and she has her infant daughter in the back seat and she hits a tree and she kills her daughter. And it's at that point that her life she cannot cope with the loss of her daughter at her own hands, is the way she sees it.
We've seen that happen time and time again.
It's tragic.
Yeah,
it's
people's
tragic.
lives fall apart like that.
Yeah. And so she turns to heavy drinking, and then that develops into drug use, which develops into, heavy narcotics use. And that's why she's into this heroin at this point.
Right.
And it's this cycle that she just can't break. She is deep in heavy narcotics at this point.
Right.
And so when I first found her, her mom says, I'm only going to help you if you can get her treatment. That's what she tells me. So I called the prosecutors, who weren't Josh at this time. This is way before Josh.
And that's another thing that people, right? Because I've had situations where prosecutors come up to me, old case, but for whatever reason, the DA is no longer there. Right. So a new prosecutor comes in and they come up to me and say, look, I just got on this case. I know it's an old case, but this prosecutor left. They now live out of state or out of, whatever. And I need to catch up on all of this information. There's no way I could try this. And as a judge, do you say it's more important that this thing is tried quickly, the community is looking at us, the community is wondering what's taking this so long, or are you going to allow justice to actually happen and let both sides be fully prepared? And sometimes that could take up to a year.
Oh, yeah.
The Otis McCain case, which is that death penalty case, which you were involved in, that's what happened there.
Right.
Because there was a new administration, the DA's office changed hands. The new DA, Joe Gonzalez, came to me and said, look, it's going to take our prosecutors at least a year to get ready. This is such a huge case. And even though the community at that point was questioning, why is this taking so long? I saw that it was a necessary part of that process to allow these prosecutors to get up to speed. That way, both sides had the best opportunity to try their best case.
Oh, yeah.
So that's another thing, right? So that probably happened here in this case.
Oh, 100%. And,
Yeah.
the prosecutors way early on were the ones that were very insistent on having Sylvia.
Mm-hmm.
They felt, we cannot proceed without her. So when I informed them, I do have her, but she's not in a good state. I mean, she is heavily addicted. I don't even know how they did it. They got her a bed at a treatment facility. And so we actually met Sylvia for the first time in the parking lot of that treatment facility.
Mm-hmm.
Mom brings her out and she could barely walk. I mean, she is so heavily intoxicated.
Yes.
And they admit her, and I get a phone call the next day from Sylvia's mom saying she escaped from the facility last night.
She fled.
She
Yes.
just ran out of there.
And that caused a continuance.
Yes. And so moving forward over the next 4 years, like you pointed out, I was constantly finding her and losing her multiple times.
And at some point, I remember the prosecutor. Now just so we know, there'd never been conversations with me without the other side. So when our district attorney, Joe Gonzalez, asked me for a time, the defense was there. So there was a situation which I do specifically recall. I didn't realize it was this case. And judges are not aware of the profile nature of a case. So even though folks have a tendency to think that judges know everything about a case, I never had any idea how big of a case this was at this time.
Sure.
But I remember that I called the case to trial. Parties had said that they were ready. It was a murder case, and it was probably a few years into this. And the DA, at that time, it was Dan Rodriguez, who was a prosecutor in the court. He dismissed the case. And he dismissed the case because they couldn't find a necessary material witness. I didn't know what the reason for that was, but looking back, that's what happened. She was missing, dismissed it, which then, because he dismissed it that way, did give the DA's office an opportunity to refile that case.
And I think that's when Josh got in.
Yes.
Got in on it. Because now it was now refiled. Josh was now the major crimes guy.
Yes.
And he had the luxury of essentially cherry picking a case. And so I know a lot of law enforcement would come to him and say, hey, look, this case was dismissed for whatever reason. And they would go through all the facts of the case. And, Josh is one of those guys that if he can try it, he will try it.
Absolutely.
So I'm sure that's when he got in on it. And we were still looking for Sylvia, still losing her and finding her. And a couple of times I would take attorneys to the house that she was at, but we couldn't even talk to her most of the time. She was so heavily intoxicated that, even she probably didn't know we were even there. And so
this is a material witness, right? So this is not somebody we can put in jail and put a bond and all that.
Right.
Which later that became somewhat of an issue. But the reality of it was, as a material witness, how do you hold on to somebody like that? So I do remember we put a GPS on her.
Yeah.
And it's something that all the parties agreed to. The defense was present, but Sylvia had an attorney at that time because she had a misdemeanor case.
That's right. That's right.
So there was a GPS that we put on her, so we knew how to stay on top of her, which all the parties agreed to. And at some point, she was driving somewhere with her mother. She jumped out of the moving vehicle and cut the GPS off. So
right.
She was, right. So all these kinds of things were happening with her.
And I at some point around this same time, she was kind of getting more lucid to talk to. We get pockets of time where we could talk to her. And around this time, it may have been before or after she cuts the monitor, that I'm talking to her. And she says, I can't be around my mother because my mother always reminds me of my daughter. Which is true, because I had been to Mom's house many times, and Mom had this huge tree in the front yard, and on the tree was a picture of the daughter, like tacked to the tree,
wow.
like as a remembrance, like you hit not this tree, but you hit a tree and you killed my granddaughter. And so she's like, every time I try to get there, Mom kind of reminds me of what happens, and I cycles all into
the
it.
Whole dynamic going on there.
It was crazy, and
right.
I'm encouraging her to stay with Mom because that's my lifeline to her.
Right.
So I'm like. I'm trying you gotta work things out. I'm over here being in my counselor mode right here as best I can. And, but she, eventually she goes right back into heavy drug use, and we essentially lose her again. And I remember it was close to Christmas time. I'm with Matt Ludwig, and he's one of the prosecutors on it. And we're kind of stressing because I think we were approaching Christmas break. And we went to all the normal spots we had found Sylvia, and every single one she's not there. And I had exhausted my little list of all the spots I found her. I was like, I don't know where else to look. And we're driving back, we're a little defeated. And I said, there's one spot I've never checked. And it was the grandmother's house. And I said, we're close to Christmas, daughters and grandma. Let's just try it. And so on the way back to the office, we stopped by grandma's house, which is an apartment. I go and knock on the door, and grandma opens the door, and I identify myself, and I'm here to see Sylvia. She goes, yeah, she's right there. And I look over over grandma's shoulder, and Sylvia's packing a bag as she sees us.
Trying to leave.
Yeah. And we happened at this point to have a writ of attachment. I guess we had already got to that part of it.
Which I had signed.
I believe so, yeah. Because we brought her before you.
Yeah, which was a bring this person before the court instanter immediately.
Correct. Yes. It's kind of akin to a warrant. It may not have the same teeth as a warrant, but you will take them into custody. And so, I put her in handcuffs and put her in my car and drove her straight to here, the courthouse. And we put her right before you, I think within like 30 minutes of me grabbing her.
And that's what happens when somebody is summoned and they don't show up to court.
Right.
So if somebody gets a summons, you got to come to court on this day. You refuse to go, then a writ of attachment can be filed and signed.
And what's interesting about that period of time is Jenny's Law, and maybe you can explain to your listening audience what that is.
Yeah.
It had legislation, announced it in September, but it takes effect January 1.
Yes.
And so we got her just before Christmas. And so she is, as I understand it, the first Jenny's Law hearing to occur, in the state.
Yeah. And what that was a new law. Apparently in Harris County, they had arrested a witness and put a witness in custody to make sure they would not lose that witness, sort of in the same manner that you were having issues with Sylvia. And because they were in custody, the question then comes up, what kind of constitutional rights does she have, right? She hasn't been accused of a crime. She's not a defendant. She's not looking at jail time. What right do we have to jail somebody? So Jenny's Law was something where you had to have a special kind of hearing if you wanted to incarcerate somebody just because they're a witness. And they got to have a lawyer. Lawyers got to be present. So there was a lawyer involved. And at that time, the lawyer, who's a very, very good attorney, his name was Andrew Froelich. He was representing her. He understood in dealing with her the necessity of protecting her. And they felt like her being incarcerated for a little bit of a period of time, had an agreement with the prosecutors that if she was in custody, she would be saved because she was really under the grips of this addiction that she had. And they felt like they had a fear for her life. Maybe she wouldn't make it past a certain time. But that was a really complicating issue that we had to deal with because the idea is we can't just jail anybody. I mean, judges don't have the ability to just turn around and say, I'm ordering this person arrested. Some people think that, but that's not really how it works.
Yeah, it's pretty rare.
Yes.
Yeah. But, in hindsight, looking back at this case, it was the time that she spent in custody that we finally got an actual statement. Like we were actually sit there and talk to her. She cleaned up. She actually
She became lucid.
Got lucid. She got better, but she, as I recall, was in custody for close to 6 months because the case again kept getting reset for whatever the reason. And it actually made local news, her being in jail as material witness, because just out of some sheer coincidence, she's in the infirmary one day and Candy Dominguez walks into the infirmary one day. Candy beats her up in the infirmary of the jail. And so local news kind of call in like, hey, this person's in jail for not committing a crime. And then the accuser meets them. And somehow it made its way out there. And
also to be clear, and I do recall this just struck me, is that part of the reason why the defense also wanted her, and she was in agreement to that, is because she was in fear of her life.
Yes,
she was the only material witness to this crime that was not involved, didn't have some sort of special deal going on with the DA's office to testify. So she was afraid that she was going to get found and killed.
Which is one of the reasons why she kept doing drugs. I mean, she was dealing with the stress of potentially, being murdered, because she truly thought that people were following her, and maybe they were. I don't know, but she truly felt that people were following her, people were trying to kill her, that she was receiving threats from various places. And again, it's very possible that this was a legitimate thing.
Yeah. So at that time, in her mind, that jail was where she could be safe.
She was happy in jail. When we talked to her, she was going to classes, she was getting treatment, and she was starting to kind of get around. And then that assault took place, and so she went. I think she went before Carruthers, and
That's right.
they released her from the witness hold, and because we had a trial date fairly close. I want to say it was within 4 weeks of the time he released her. And so she still maintained contact. She was clean now. She'd been in jail almost 6 months. And so that's how we were able to actually get her in to testify. It would have been better this way because had she been on the streets, I don't know how she would have testified. She still would have probably been heavily intoxicated.
If she would have been alive, right?
Even if she would have been alive,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so the fact that she was in jail and clean, she was able to come in and testify well enough to secure the conviction that they got.
And what happened, to make sure that her rights are protected, what happened was the parties came before me with an agreement to have her in custody during the trial. We're about to start that trial. And for whatever reason, I can't recall why, but something happened where we could not start that trial. So we had that agreement that she'd be incarcerated just until she testified,
Yes,
which
that's
would have been
true.
just a few days. Subsequent to that, she went to another judge named Andrew Carruthers. And folks sometimes don't have an understanding that judges oftentimes hear each other's cases and not for any reason other than to assist each other. And Judge Carruthers was a magistrate judge, an excellent magistrate judge who basically just retired, longest serving judge. And I'm very fortunate to have been able to work with him for as long as I have. And they kept having hearings before him, which were periodic to make sure that the parties still agreed that she would stay in custody.
Right. And it worked out great. She gets out, she moves back in with mom. She comes, she testifies. I remember her saying that it felt therapeutic for her to
Oh, wow.
be in court,
Yeah.
to face the accuser, to say what happened. And so she was very cooperative. In fact, when we went on to the next trial, which was on the co-defendant, she was cooperative for that. We had a few issues with her here and there, but for the most part, she was showing up, and she came and she testified for the. I think Gabriel Moreno had two trials because one of them was like a mistrial
It was
or
a
something.
mistrial,
Yeah.
which is interesting because people always want to know juries and they think they're so certain. So the trial had evidence which is very grisly, right? So at some point after they killed Pee Wee, these two individuals, Daniel and Gabriel, killed Pee Wee. They dismembered his body. They put it in this big blue bin, which ended up being an issue in the trial. They transported it to some place on the outskirts of town. At that time, it was in the far northwest,
Yes.
Helotes type area. Don't necessarily think it was in Helotes, but that's an area in San Antonio which is on the outskirts, far northwest of town. They buried the body. Then a few days later, they dug up that body and brought it back to the home. But it was dismembered. And because it was dismembered, then they started to burn the body parts in a barbecue pit, which was in the center of town, the center of San Antonio, chain link fences. So the photographs show these neighbors, the houses
Yes.
all nearby. But Sylvia was a true witness to hearing this murder take place, and was very aware of her boyfriend being burned in this barbecue pit because at some point they took her outside and she saw body parts sticking out of the
Yes.
pit and she saw them all laughing about it.
Right. She came out and she saw, I think, his leg on a pit, and they had made some joke about like you hungry, something
Right.
like that.
Right.
And she was forced to see this, like, and she was afraid to laugh. She was afraid not to laugh, and so she just kind of sat there and just kind of forced into this situation. But I think it was the other location, which for Atascosa County is popping in my head. I'm not too sure that's where it was at, but I believe it was there that the fire department was called when they were burning his body because of the smell.
Right.
And so the fire department shows up, and these guys, like I said, gang members are very silver tongued. They know how to talk, very charismatic. They basically tell the fire department they're burning leaves. And so they tell them, well, cut that out, and they leave. So that's why they went back with the body to continue to burn it at their house. And they never got a chance to continue to burn him because they ended up getting arrested. By this point, Candy's father told the mother, who told the police, and the investigation had begun. One thing that I remember finding interesting was, Sylvia's in the house. Menchaca had just been murdered. She's in the bathroom, and I want to say it's the very next day. She's still in the bathroom. She's chained up there, and she hears a knock on the door, and she's listening, and it's Child Protective Services shows up. with police to do a home inspection. And she can hear the whole, I'm here to do this. And she's thinking, I'm saved. Like, thank God. And once again, very charismatic, Candy, Gabriel, and Daniel. And they're talking back with the CPS worker where they don't end up doing the home inspection. They leave. And so they never actually see, had they walked in, they would have saw this room full of blood. They would have saw her chained up and, to the toilet. They would have saw this stuff and they never went there. And so now she's thinking, she had she described it as this moment of just sheer like terror. Like, that was my one chance and it's gone. And just having to hear them walk away, get in the car and drive away was just too much for her.
Mm-hmm.
But, I remember talking to her and just thinking like, this is, I've seen a lot of murders in my time here. This one was one of the most gruesome because they beat him with a bat. I mean, the amount of passion you have to beat someone with a bat. That's not how they killed him, though. I don't know if you remember. They took him to the detached garage. He still has about a little ounce of life in him. And Daniel Lopez puts a bag over his face, and that's how they kill him. They actually suffocate him with a bag.
Yeah, they got duct tape, right? And they put it around
Right.
around the bottom part of that. Let's do a quick Q&A break. You're listening to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. Stay with us. We've got some questions from the audience coming up next.
This is Q&A with Judge Ron Rangel. Submit your question today at beyondthegavelpodcast.com.
Welcome to the Q&A break. Let's take a question from one of our listeners. Do you have to have a material witness when you're dealing with the case? What do you think?
Well, it depends on the case. If it's a victim case, you will have to have a material witness. Some of our cases, the witnesses are law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to think of something like maybe like a DWI,
Right.
where a person was pulled over by the police officer. Well, it's just the defendant and the police officer. I guess you could say your material witness is the officer, but I think what the listeners are thinking about are like lay witnesses or outside witnesses. So it kind of depends on the case. Most cases, I would probably say yes, we would have a material witness. However, cases do exist where you do not have one.
I think a good example of that, of not having a witness, would be an assault family violence case. When I was a prosecutor, I did have a family violence assault. It was actually an aggravated assault with a deadly weapon where the victim did not want to come in and participate for a multitude of reasons. It was very difficult to try that, and jurors do expect to hear from that person. And then their minds are thinking, if we're not getting all the evidence, we're not comfortable convicting this person and giving them this very significant charge. However, cases, generally speaking, do much better in court with a material witness. You would agree with that?
Absolutely. And defense will certainly point out the fact that, the witness didn't show up. It can't be that important. Or what are they hiding? Or they'll give some sort of, try to assert some reason why we don't have a material witness here. And then it leaves the jury wondering. And of course, it's all about doubt at the end of the day, and so that defense attorney is going to raise that doubt if that witness doesn't show up.
That's an interesting question. Keep on asking those questions. We love to receive them here at Beyond the Gavel. You could text us anytime or reach out through the website at beyondthegavelpodcast.com. Let's continue our conversation.
This is Q&A with Judge Ron Rangel. Submit your question today at beyondthegavelpodcast.com.
Welcome back to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. I'm here with Anthony Rodriguez. Let's jump right back where we left off. One of the things that I recall, and this is kind of important for folks to know. So Danny Lopez was found guilty by a jury. And I don't remember who did the sentence. I don't remember if it was myself or the jury.
It was no jury. It was
So it
just
was me.
Right.
Okay. So I sentenced him to life. And I do recall this now. So the jury finds him guilty. I sentence him to life. And then a lot of folks come to me in the community and they're a little upset at me because I didn't sentence him to death. Why was that not a death penalty case? And I had to explain the death penalty case is a murder with other aggravating factors, and those aggravating factors did not apply here. For instance, I was recently involved in a case where a gentleman was charged with killing his girlfriend and his girlfriend's daughter with an axe. That's an aggravating factor, 2 people that were killed. or let's say somebody was murdered and they were under the age of 10. That's an aggravating factor. So those aggravating factors that allow for a death penalty sentence did not apply in this case. So the maximum sentence that Daniel could have gotten was life. His co-defendant, Gabriel, was also tried, and you mentioned there were 2 trials. Now, the interesting part of this is the first trial occurred, and I ended up having to call a hung jury because the jury could not, all 12 of them have to agree whether or not he's guilty or not guilty. And in this case, when I went to the back, it had to be a hung jury. The notes kept coming out. There's no way we're going to agree to it. It's impossible that we're going to have an agreement. I read to them something called an Allen charge, which basically tells them, look, you got all the evidence anybody's going to have. If you don't agree, ultimately this case has to be retried, right? It's up to the state to do that. But generally speaking, that would be the end result. The interesting part is when I went to the back and I spoke to the jury, there were 11-1. They were hung. 11 believed that he was guilty. 1 believed that he was not guilty. And the reason why they came out with that, according to the 1, is because the only witness they had was a heroin addict who was in the throes of this addiction, right? So then we tried the case again. Now, this is an individual, Gabriel, had tattoos all over his face by this time, all over his neck. So the media loved to play that portion of it because he looked a certain way. The jury came back with a verdict of not guilty. And so I tell folks all the time, you never know which way it's going to go. So here you had the exact same evidence on a very gruesome killing that gripped the city. You had one jury that was 11-1 guilty, hung. The exact same evidence, another jury, all agreed that he was not guilty.
Yep.
So we're talking about the co-defendant. So you just never know. And that's a risk that parties always take when they go to trial. Prosecutors, they have to analyze what are the risks here. And sometimes they have to make that decision of it's going to be a little nerve-wracking to see if we can get a jury to agree, regardless of how it looks, regardless of how the defendant looks. Juries are charged with looking at the law and following the law when they make these decisions. So you never really know what's going to be the end result in a trial.
I don't know how many times I've heard a prosecutor tell family or whatever, trials are unpredictable.
Completely.
I mean, completely. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to come in sometimes. We don't know what the jury is going to fully digest, especially when you have a lot of factual evidence. You know, I've sat in these trials and heard like doctors and experts explain like DNA. And I just get glossy eyed. I don't know what is being said, but they got to put in the record. They have to say it. And I'm looking at these juries, and sometimes you could tell they're just lost. So you don't know what a juror is going to register. I remember the 11-1, and if I recall, that one juror had said something to the effect of, "My sister is a drug addict.
That's exactly right.
I don't believe her, so I can never believe the word of another drug addict."
That's exactly right.
Would not budge on that, and he got a mistrial.
Yeah, and at that time, the media was really involved, and people were, again, coming at me,
Sure,
saying, how could you find this person not guilty? What is wrong with you, judge? And it was like, that was a jury.
Right.
And it's not necessarily saying that they did anything wrong either, right? Because they're the ones that are put in that position. It's not until you're in that fact-finding position that you recognize how difficult it is.
Oh, yeah.
To listen to all of this testimony, get all this evidence, figure out what's true and what's not true, and then put it together with the law that the judge gives you, law that's foreign to pretty much every juror that is out there. How difficult was it for you to deal with that media frenzy related to that trial and the work that you had to do to bring that to the court?
For the media is really good here. The media is really good.
I do agree.
They understand that we can't talk to them. They're very rarely will they come and talk specifically to me. A lot of times they'll come up at the end and they'll ask for a statement from the prosecutor. Occasionally they'll ask for some clarity, like, who was that, or how do you spell this name? Very, very basic stuff, stuff that's not like things we can't talk about. But the media here is actually very cooperative with us. And so we didn't have much of a problem. Now, the only problem we did have is when I would go home at night, I'd watch the news or I'd read the paper, and sometimes they're not true. It's not true. It sounds true, or it sounds more sensational, but it's not.
Well, a good example of that is how you just explained and clarified to us that when the report first came to you from SAPD, Candy Dominguez was this innocent person that was coerced to be involved somehow.
Right.
But once you looked at it, then you were able to decipher and figure out her role. And as a result of that, there was a plea bargain for her to testify before me, where if she testified truthfully, then the maximum sentence that I could give her would be 30 years as
Right.
part of this plea bargain. So when she came before me on the sentence, I gave her the 30 years.
Yeah.
And the defense argument was that she had been coerced. But it's not until you're in the courtroom that you feel these people, right? So you're thinking about these investigators that are doing all this stuff, and it's difficult for them because they're not seeing somebody under cross-examination in front of a jury.
Right.
When I got that sense of Candy and what she was about, I felt like 30 years is the absolute lowest at that point.
Yeah.
That was appropriate because I could sense her involvement in that. But as an investigator, you don't have the benefit of that.
Well, Candy is unique because when I got on the case, the deal was already done, so she was already going to be our witness.
Yes.
And so we were in the phase where we were interviewing all the witnesses, and so we decided, let's talk to Candy. And so we actually brought her from the jail here to this office, and we had a room set up, and we brought her in, and it was Josh, myself, a couple of other prosecutors, and up until this point, we understood her role, so to speak. We were now past the innocent girl. We knew at this point she was a participant. We interviewed other witnesses, but
that deal had been made.
Deal was done.
Yeah.
Because remember, we came in late.
Yeah.
We were way late. Other, like we talked about earlier, other prosecutors were on it before Josh got on it. And so by the time Josh got on it, and to a lesser extent myself, Josh was big on interviewing everybody, police, everybody. And so she's definitely one of them. And so we brought her over. We knew what she had told police. We knew what other witnesses had said about her. And we had already formed an opinion that, like, okay, she has more to do with this than just somebody who was coerced, And so we bring her over. I always lead the interviews when we bring these witnesses over. So I have her sitting in there, and I start the interview. And we actually get into this in a Netflix show that she starts talking, and she immediately makes it clear that she wasn't just a participant, but she was actually she was actually the one that kind of set this whole thing up. She's the one that directed the dismemberment. This is her own cousin, mind you, directed the dismemberment, the burning of the body. She starts talking that, like, she was the one in charge, and she had all kinds of names for Daniel Lopez and Guillermo Moreno, that they were not decisive. They didn't know what to do. So she took charge. And so we're hearing this, and this is, we knew at this point that she had more of a role. We just didn't know to what degree. And now we hear her talking this, and I remember kind of looking around the room, and we're just kind of like shocked to hear this. It's not what we expected to this degree,
But then you guys are witnesses, so you guys can't come in to testify to that.
Right. Well, that's why I'm in there.
Yes, that makes
to
sense.
lead the interview, just in case,
Somebody needs to come
right.
in.
And so that's why I lead the interview for that exact purpose. We don't want to make the prosecutors the witness.
She had an attorney present at that time?
No, she had a full deal. Like as I remember, she was just waiting she was held in the jail waiting for the trial.
So it's part of that deal.
Correct.
You get the ability to talk to her, to communicate with her, to prepare for trial.
Yes.
And the maximum she can get is 30.
Right. Her deal is contingent on her testimony.
Right.
And so, and she fully understood that. We brought her in, and we, always start the interview with reminding her of this deal. Actually, I think I may have read it to her.
Yes.
And she fully understood that. And I said, just tell us the truth. And it was an unfiltered truth. She just went on. She went on to explain that she knew, because when she first talking about directing them to dismember the bodies, my gut reaction was she's trying to boast. Like, I didn't believe her. I felt that she was just trying to impress us. And so I remember kind of calling her out, saying, look, tell us the truth. I don't believe you. Mm-hmm. And she goes into explicit detail on how to dismember and burn a body. Mm-hmm. And she talked about, like, tapping the bones when they're burned to make sure that they turn to dust and everything. And so I soon realized she knew what she was talking about. So then my next question was, how do you know how to do this? And she explains that that's how she makes money. Cartels show up at her doorstep with bags full of body parts of victims from Mexico, and her job was to dispose of these body parts. Mm-hmm. And she had been doing that for years before this case happened. So she already knew how to burn bodies, and she just went into full detail on this part of her life before the barbecue case. And so I was terrified of this person. I'm a gang officer. I've been talking to gang members for years, and that lady scared me. When she walked out of the room, I was like, "Holy cow!"
Well, this is a gruesome circumstance. And so, in terms of being featured on such a global platform, such as Netflix, how does that have an impact on the survivors of these types of crimes, the families involved with the victims, the legal folks that are involved, like yourself and Josh Summers, a prosecutor? What kind of effect does that have on you?
Well, I hadn't talked to Sylvia's mom in years, and then Netflix calls, and one of the people they wanted to talk to was Sylvia, and so I still had Andrene's cell phone number. By this point, for 4 years I'd been dealing with the mom, so I called her up, and she answered the phone, and we picked up talking just as if we had done years before. And my wife got mad at me because I remember going to her house, and she would, those Croc sandals, people put little like characters on there, and the mom was now selling those little characters. And so I get over there, and she greets me with a hug, and she brings me in, and she shows me these little things that she's building for the Croc shoes, and she gives me a bag of them. She's like, "Here, just take them." So I took them home and gave my wife. Never told her that this is from the mom of Sylvia Flores until the show came out, and I said, "You see that lady? She that's where those things came from." But point is, I got a chance to now reconnect with Sylvia's mom because of the show. And we talked for a while, and she, told me what's going on with the family. And so this show got me to reconnect with the victim's family, which is not a normal part of our orbit. We do meet with victims and victims' families, and we get very close with them, especially our victim advocates. They get very close with them and talk to them frequently, and the trial's over. And it's kind of like someone just kind of flickers a switch, and we're off to the next one.
Move on to the next.
And we never get a chance to hear what happened with that family. Occasionally they'll call or send an email or something, but it's very rare. And so this gave me that opportunity to reconnect with her. And she was a very nice lady, has a wonderful family. Just Sylvia just kind of got caught up in the world she got caught up in. And sadly, we could not get Sylvia for the show because Sylvia had entered that world of narcotics again, still in it now, as I understand it. And she may be one of those people one of those statistics that'll never break out of that lifestyle. But she's been through a lot of trauma. It's hard to hold that against Sylvia with the loss of her daughter, seeing the murder of her boyfriend, and who knows what else has happened in between all that, especially the world she had to live in with selling drugs and selling her body and everything else.
I think it's important for folks to understand that not everybody involved in these circumstances are bad people, right? There's a million different reasons why people get to the position where they're at. And it's difficult to judge difficult to judge them and their circumstances. One of the things that just struck me, and I don't know if the Netflix episodes talked about this, but at some point during a jury trial, Daniel yelled out or had some sort of outburst towards the jury. Is that right?
I remember, yes. He had it towards the jury, but I think it was directed at everybody in the courtroom. But if I remember, it was the punishment phase. So leading, he's found guilty of the murder. I'm still monitoring his, jail calls and mail and stuff, and I locate. I think it goes through a jail call where he's saying he's going to get a gun and bring it into the courtroom. At this point, Daniel Lopez and Gabriel Moreno were very successful at getting stuff into the jail. Very successful. They had brought phones in. We were finding social media posts that they were putting from in the cells. They had corrupted a couple of guards. Gabriel Moreno ends up marrying a nurse from the jail. They're very successful at corruption. So when he makes this threat of trying to get a gun in, it's like, well, you can't ignore it as an impossibility. So I remember meeting with the sheriff's office and showing everything we had found. So during the punishment phase, I don't know if you remember, the SWAT team was transporting Daniel Lopez from the jail here. And sitting in the jury box was Daniel, and right next to him was this huge SWAT officer just staring at him, just in case he did anything. And he did. He'd made some sort of outburst. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he made an outburst as he was being brought back to the holding cell.
And sort of along those lines, at some point during the trial with Joker, Gabriel
Moreno. Yeah.
There was some sort of allegation made that he was bringing in some sort of a knife or some sort of a shank or something into the courtroom, and he had made some sort of commentary about the bailiffs that work with me, the guys that work with the sheriff, and so that, even though he was found not guilty, he was still held for that case. And because it was one of the deputies that I work with, I thought it would be appropriate that I not hear that case. And so I did recuse myself from that. And you know, folks don't always understand. It's not always mandatory that a judge recuses themselves. But I always felt like if there's anything that could be in question, whether it exists or not, even though it's not a situation where I need to get off of a case or transfer it to somebody else, there's plenty of judges here. There's plenty of judges that would take over a case. There's no reason for the community to ever be left with a situation where they feel like maybe something was improper. So I do recall that circumstance, and I did pass that case off. And an example of that, there was a high-profile defendant who was accused of a crime, which happened to fall in my court, the courtroom that I oversee, the community's courtroom.
Right.
And for whatever reason, I had seen this high-profile person at an event. I wasn't too familiar with her, but there was a photograph with a family that was taken. People were lining up to take pictures with me because I was a speaker at this event. And even though that is not something that would require a judge to recuse themselves, I thought it would be appropriate for me to do so just because you don't want anybody to feel like anything is going on that's inappropriate. And I remember at that point, whoever the media personality was did try to make an issue of that, like it was some sort of high-profile recusal. But it's always what's in the best interest of our community? What's in the best interest of these cases? We want these cases to be tried right. And I could tell with the work that you do that that's an important thing for you as well.
Well, and one of the worst feelings I'm sure a judge would have is somebody walked because something wasn't taken, appropriately for whatever reason, and some technicality happened, and now we could not try the case. So,
right.
And I've seen the judges here, y'all all work together really well. Where cases get dropped from one court to another court, right. And I've never heard of a situation where a judge refused to take a case. A lot of times most of the cases speeds up the trial. It right. jumps to another court, and suddenly, boom, we're going tomorrow. And we're like, oh no, we better get ready now.
Right. Right. And it's good to have those relationships. And the thing that struck me when you were talking about communicating with Sylvia's mom is you're building up these very significant relationships and then you move off. So I'm glad you had the opportunity to reconnect with her. That, to me, that seems like it would be something which is a good thing for both you and her.
Well, Andre McDonald, meeting with her, Andre's father, Paul mm-hmm. Anderson, who lives in England. Wonderful man, and when he was here for the trial was, Andre's mother, I'm drawing a blank on her name, kept inviting me to her house to have oxtail. They're Jamaican. Uh-huh. And I was thinking, I'm not going to eat oxtail. But the invite was a standing invite. Wonderful people. I remember picking them up to bring them to court. I had to, at times, help drop off their daughter at school so they could go to court. And so, I'm meeting, her, her daughter, her sister, dad, everybody. And the trials go on for 2 or 3 weeks, so this is a daily thing. And of course, the victim advocates are talking to them on the phone daily, sometimes over the weekend. And so it's weird when suddenly it ends. It's just over. And now you just don't talk to them anymore. And there are times where, I'll talk to the advocates or the prosecutors and we'll wonder, like, I wonder how so-and-so is doing. I wonder how, did they ever, go and do this or go and buy that? Because we would hear about their life. Some people were looking to buy a house, or, some people were going through things in their lives like divorces or whatever. And you're just kind of wondering, what happened to this person. And most time we just never know. And it's sad for us at times.
Yeah, and that's a big difference between what you do and what judges do, right? A lot of times people think that judges know everything about cases. I referenced that earlier in this podcast. The reality of it is we're just looking at legal things. When I'm in a jury trial, I don't necessarily pay attention to the relationships. I'm focused more on the law. I'm focused more on, is that an appropriate way to ask that question? Does this piece of evidence come in? What does the law say on these things? And so I'm so focused on that, trying to read the testimony as the court reporter's typing it in, because I want to see what the appellate courts look at. I don't get that kind of relationship. I don't form that communication with people. So later, when people ask me, hey, what did you think about this or that in a trial, my response is generally, I really don't remember.
Right.
Because I'm so focused on that, on the legal issues, when I know that a jury has to make those determinations. Now, it's different when I got to do the sentencing. Then I'm playing twofold, right? I'm wearing two hats. I'm trying to be the fact finder, trying to figure out what I believe is true in this case. But at the same time, I'm trying to rule in a way that makes the process fair.
Right.
And so I don't get a chance to develop those kinds of relationships on the bench.
Yeah.
And sometimes people come up to me and they'll sort of remember me. And it's like, I was before you 13 years ago. And I'm like, frankly, I don't remember who was before me 2 days ago, because at that moment, I'm too busy looking at an issue, a legal issue. Most folks don't recognize that judges really don't make a whole lot of determination as to facts other than making sure that the process is fair. And so your role as an advocate is to make sure that your side is properly represented. And so as a result of that, I'm sure there's a lot of emotion that goes into it that you got to push aside.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've been in trials where, I get teary-eyed, hearing especially a victim impact, where you've met with that person and how much grief they're going through. And then they're standing up there talking to the defendant and finally have an opportunity to say all these things to that defendant. And you kind of, you feel it like more than just somebody listening. All the stuff that they've gone through. You sat there and they showed you, family photos and videos, and you've talked to the kids and stuff.
You get to know them.
You really get to know them. So when you hear that impact statement, like it really tugs at you. And that's why our victim advocates are so powerful, because they're standing there right next to them and they are really holding it in. And a lot of times when it's all over, I'll see those advocates run out of the courtroom and just have to go cry somewhere,
That's why your experience is so valuable, right? I mean, I had somebody ask me just this morning, I think, here in the courthouse, somebody asked me, how do you keep your emotions from affecting you in the decision-making process that you make? And my response at that moment was, a lot of practice.
Yeah, right.
It takes a lot of practice not to let these things get to you. There's been a couple of jury trials I've been involved. There was one not too long ago where there was a child victim in a sex case. And when the child was testifying, I could feel the wave wanting to come over me, wanting to wash over me. And I knew that there was a jury that was sitting there. So I quickly called the parties up. Can y'all approach? They approached. I maintained a straight face. I told them, let's just take a short break. Came to the back, and then I let that emotion out for a few minutes. And it did hit me pretty hard. But those are the kind of things that judges just can never show, because we cannot in any way influence a jury and what they do. We always want the process to be fair to both sides.
Right.
We never want to accuse, or we never want to be accused of somehow or another infecting that process.
Sure. It's got to be hard. I mean, you hear so many cases. I don't ever do family violence cases or child cases, so I've never been in that situation. But you're hearing that stuff, probably very frequently.
It can be difficult, right? There are times I will go home and I'll dream about a certain case, and it will have an effect on me. But then I got to compose myself, come back to court, and be a professional. That's the idea.
Yeah, I mean, and it's an important role. Having a good judge is extremely important. Because at the end of the day, you have both sides arguing their points, and if you don't have somebody in the middle who's walking that wire or not picking a side, the jury's looking to you. The jury's looking. I see them all the time. When these objections are coming up, they look right at you, and whatever you say, they just kind of go along with. So,
and that's why I go out of my way to just kind of focus on the computer. Right?
Sure.
I don't want them to read anything
right
in terms of what I decide.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense. But like you said, it takes a lot of practice.
It takes a lot of work. Anthony, I've enjoyed this conversation with you. I've learned quite a bit.
This is fun, Judge. I really enjoyed my time here. I really enjoyed talking to you. I'll never stop on an opportunity to talk about myself. So thanks for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you coming in. I know we took up a lot of your time. This has been a really good episode. Any last words that you have for our listeners?
No, well, thank you for the support. I welcome you to listen. I welcome you to ask any questions you have to the legal community. And I really enjoyed my time here.
Well, we enjoyed having you. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and keep sending in your questions. Just tap Text the Judge to share your thoughts, reviews, or questions. We might just read yours on the next Q&A break. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another great guest. Until then, stay tuned.
You've been listening to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. Join us in the next 2 weeks where we are educating the public and expanding mindsets. Head to our website, beyondthegavelpodcast.com, or your favorite podcast platform to subscribe to the latest episodes and updates.